This morning's gospel reading comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 9, and there's some selected verses. So we'll start in with verse 1. If you'd like to follow along, it's on page 102 in the Pew Bible. As he walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, that this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man or his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with his saliva, and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back and was able to see. The neighbors and those who had been with him before the beggar asked, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it's someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "Then how are your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' And when I went and washed, I received my sight." And they said to him, "Where is he?" And he said, "I do not know." Moving over to verse 35. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "I have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. And Jesus said, "I came into the world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him said, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sinned. But now you say, 'We see.' Your sin remains." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Did you all catch that first verse of the gospel reading? The disciples asked Jesus who it was that sinned against God and caused the man in the story to be born blind. Is it that man who sinned? Or is it his parents who sinned? See, right off the bat, we get a primitive understanding of why he was blind. He was blind because of sin. And now you know that sin causes blindness. You know that having any deformity is caused by sin. You know that any disease or illness is caused by sin. I have pronated ankles from birth. I sin. Right? Wrong. Wrong. Jesus tells his disciples not so. But if we had lived long ago, centuries ago and back, we would have known that sin or something we had done wrong was the root of our problems. I suppose if you had been hit by a chariot on a dusty road outside of Jerusalem and you had suffered infirmity because of that, you would have done some sin. You would have committed some wrong. The things that happen to us, I would posit that every human being on the face of the earth has something physically wrong or different that keeps them from being perfect. Being imperfect imperfect is the perfect part of the human condition. Now, let me take you to the last two verses of today's story before I back up. John, verse 40 to 42. Some of the Pharisees heard Jesus speaking, and they said to him, "Surely we are not blind." Now, of course, anything the Pharisees say is going to come back on them. They say, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." Powerful stuff. Leave it to Jesus to turn human ignorance on its head. We have avoided this scripture fastidiously in the past so that we did not offend anyone in the congregation. But the fact of the matter is we have a woman in our church who is blind. Her name is Barbara. Who is it that sinned? Was it Barbara? Or was it her parents? Who sinned? Now, before you all go crazy and get all worked up, I received Barb's permission to tell this story today. Why? Because she sees better than most of us. She and I have a good chuckle over the fact that when she used to volunteer in our church office, she could tell who was in the office before we even knew. How is that possible? Was Barbara an amateur magician? Of course not. She would come across the parking lot from her home, and with her hands as her eyes, she would feel the numbers and the letters of our license plates on our cars. And she could tell us exactly who was at church that day. One of the many Barbara stories where God has truly blessed her life, where God has given Barbara things that give God glory. Back in ancient days, the disciples, like most of the Jewish people of their day, assumed that sin was the primary, if not exclusive, cause of all suffering and infirmity. There were hundreds of rituals to purify and to sanctify the sufferings and the infirmity of others. Over 600 types of procedures and laws. The blind man was a known local. He was known to his community as a beggar. And he lived out on the streets. We don't have to worry about that today, do we? Nobody's out there. And the disciples asked the question of sin. Jesus responds by essentially saying that no sin was attached to the blindness. The man was born blind, so that God's work might be revealed in this man, so that that blindness would attest to God's glory. And Jesus then ends this section of the story by saying, "I am the light of the world." Exodus 3, verse 14, Moses asked God his name. The reply comes back, "I am. I am who I am. I am that I am." In the Hebrew, it is Eyah Asher Eyah. I am that I am. Jesus says in John verse 5, "I am the light of the world." Sight or no sight, Jesus provides all the sight that we need. He doesn't explain any connection between sin and suffering. He says that man's affliction came to give God an opportunity of being glorified. Now listen carefully to this. Affliction, sorrow, pain, disappointment, loss, all of these and more are opportunities to display God's grace. Sight or no sight, Jesus is all the sight that we need for our lives. Part two. Part two is this bizarre healing. What's the deal with dirt and saliva? As I said earlier this morning at the 8 o'clock service, I saw Billy sitting there. Billy Holbrook used to be a dentist. She saw more saliva than most of us will see in a lifetime. Just a side note before we begin playing in the mud here. This is the only miracle in the Gospels where the sufferer is said to have been afflicted from birth. It is one of the longest healing stories in the Bible. And finally, it uses the blind man to show forth the glory of God. And we are talking here about spiritual blindness, not physical blindness. But back to saliva, spit, and dirt. And I'm about to date myself here, for any of you millennials. Have any of you ever been to a dinner party, or a wedding, or a regular old party, where somebody lifts a glass of champagne or something, whatever it is. They clink the glasses together and they create a toast, and it said, "Here's mud in your eye." Remember that? Here's mud in your eye. Now, if you go on to the computer, to the websites, to Google or any other search engines, and you ask what that means, they'll say it's a toast, it's a celebration. One said, doesn't mean anything. But then the really appropriate website says that it goes back to Jesus when he placed the mud on the man's eyes. What a celebration it must have been. John 9, verse 32. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person truly born blind. But remember, friends, all things, what? All things, says the Bible, all things are possible through Jesus Christ who strengthens us. I told you occasionally about my little 3x5 cards that I used to write up. This was one I kept in my wallet for years. All things are possible through Jesus Christ who strengthens us. And Jesus spits on the ground and he makes mud pies with the spittle and the dirt. Now for the yuck factor, the gross factor, he takes this stuff, this poultice, and he spreads the mix on the eyes of the blind beggar. Then he tells him to go wash in the pool of Siloam. Siloam means sent. So Jesus sends him to wash in this pool. One scholar, one reputable scholar, believe it or not, suggested that this mud, that this creation of mud pack, was actually 2 eyeballs that were made for the beggar. Can you imagine this? This guy's actually reputable. And he says they took this mud and he made these eyeballs and stuck them in the man's head. I don't think so. Another person said, well, you know, he's representing creation. Takes the dust of the earth and it represents creation. No, say the Jewish rabbis of that day. In response to this healing, they say he's an amateur magician. That was their quote. He's an amateur magician. Would it surprise you to learn that the saliva of a prophet, or one who is considered divine, had healing properties back then? Did you ever hear of a Roman guy named Pliny? P-L-I-N-Y? Pliny wrote this scientific book, and in that book he devotes an entire chapter to the saliva of amazing people. And he says this saliva can cure the evil eye, it can cure epilepsy, it can cure leprosy, it can cure the venom of a serpent. Hear now a story from Cornelius Tacitus. Who in the heck and what in the heck is a Cornelius Tacitus? Tacitus is the historian of the Roman Empire, and he is born 20 years after the crucifixion of Christ. So I want you to listen carefully to the story and see if you hear any similarities to our story today. This is Tacitus from his work called The Histories, Book 4, Chapter 81, if you're ever interested. One day, one of the common people of Alexandria, well known for his blindness, threw himself at the emperor's knees and implored him with groans to heal his infirmity. This he did by the advice of the god Serapis, whom the nation worships more than any other divinity. Tacitus continues, and I quote, "He begged Emperor Vespasian to wet his cheeks and eyes with his spit, or his saliva. Another with a diseased hand asked the same exact thing. Vespasian ridiculed them, but they persisted. If the eyes and the hand were healed, Vespasian reasoned, it would glorify him, the emperor, and if not, the condition of the two men would revert back to them. The failure would be on them." Vespasian, supposing that all things were possible for his good fortune and glory, and with the expectation of the multitude and of the bystanders, spit into his hand, and he rubbed the eyes of the blind man, and he rubbed the hand of the man who had the deformity of the hand, and the limbs and the eye were restored, and people went out and attested to these facts. Sound familiar? The man in Jesus' story goes to wash in the pool of Siloam, yet another fulfillment of Jewish purity and ritual laws. John concludes the second part of the story with the astonishment of the neighbors. The man comes back. He now sees. They know him as blind. The neighbors are astonished. And then John, the Gospel of John, moves on to the final part of the story, its purpose. We have a prelude to the story, we have the healing, and now the purpose. As good literary form has it, Jesus begins this section by getting ready to tear apart the Pharisees. You should know by now that anything in the Bible that has to do with Pharisees, Jesus is going to be there and he's going to tear them apart. And he does. The man washed in the waters of Siloam is asked to account for himself because the Pharisees don't believe he was blind from birth. So who do they call in to testify? They call in Mom and Dad. Mom and Dad come in. Pharisees say, Mom and Dad, was this guy blind from birth? Yep, he was. They tell their truth, and then they turn it back to their grown son. It's amazing that God could be glorified through something that was not beautiful or perfect. Christ says, don't blame the mother, don't blame the father or this man, because there is no sin. There is no blame. Jesus says, I'm going to use brokenness for my glory. I'm going to use emptiness for my glory. I'm going to use those in need for my glory. I'm going to use those who are in poverty and those who are outcast for my glory. I'm going to use all these things for my glory. And Jesus says, I'm going to use this man's blindness for my glory. The power of God incarnate, the love of God for his people. You heard the little children this morning talk about the love of God. And it is the love of God for his people. Watch the blind man confound the experts of the law. There's a whole passage in there in John 9 that you didn't get to hear this morning, but it's really a dialogue between the Pharisees and the man, and they are absolutely convinced that this man is still tricking them. You know what Jesus does? Jesus takes those who have elevated themselves up high and mighty, and he brings them down, and he elevates those who are low in all of his ministry, in his entire ministry, and he elevates them up high. The high shall be brought low, the low shall be brought high. And then Jesus turns to the man and says, "You're too holy for these Pharisees. You're too good for these experts of the law. Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man says, "Yes, Lord, I believe." Friends, faith is the belief in things not seen. And grace is the blinding power of God for salvation. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind. Lo, I tell you a mystery. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, we will all be changed." God calls us to reach in and to reach out, to be faithful and faith-filled servants of an eternal kingdom. And how does he do it? Jesus does it with amazing mud, amazing saliva, and blinding